Welcome to More Than a Broker, the podcast that goes beyond the traditional definition of a logistics provider. My name is Andrew Elsner, co-founder of Spot. In each episode, we will dive into the stories of industry experts, keep you up to date on the highs and lows of the logistics marketplace, and introduce you to the people behind the advanced technologies that are driving innovation for brokers, shippers, and carriers within our industry. Join us as we explore the world of logistics through a different lens. This is More Than a Broker.
Drivers, start your engine!
Welcome to More Than a Broker. I'm Craig Hunter, Vice President of Operations at Spot. Today, I'm taking over the podcast to talk with some fantastic guests about a topic that should be on the minds of everyone in the logistics and freight industry: theft, loss prevention, and carrier visibility. We'll cover current trends, how companies can combat them, and we'll take a deep dive into some real-world examples. Thanks for listening to More Than a Broker. Appreciate you guys joining the More Than a Broker podcast. We've got a great group of guests here with us today. I just wanted to do a quick intro of each of you guys. If you could start and go around and just a little bit about the companies that you represent and what your roles are within the organizations. If you want to start, Joe, we can start with you.
I'm Joe Byers. I'm the co-founder and CEO of CarrierOK. We maintain online profiles for every FMCSA registered carrier and brokerage in the country. I like to think of it as like the digital baseball card for every company, roughly 4 million companies. So it's all the facts that you might want to know about a company all in a single screen. And we update them every day. We bring in FMCSA Safer, authority, insurance information, as well as some other data sources to give our customers, largely 3PLs, brokerages, factoring companies, a really clear view of who they're going to do business with.
Thank you, Joe. Kick it over to you, Keith, if you'd like to go.
Keith Lewis, Vice President of Operations with CargoNet. CargoNet is a Byers solution. I'm a retired special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. My last 15 years of my law enforcement career, I specialized just working any type of crime against the supply chain. Joined Byers in 2011. We take in theft data from various of sources, brokers, asset-based carriers, freight forwarders, insurance companies, owner-operators. We take that data in and we provide intelligence bolos to law enforcement and to our members on theft and fraud prevention.
Richie, if you'd like to go.
My name is Rich Daigle. I'm an enterprise account executive with Tive. Tive is a company that all of our efforts are to help companies make sure that their freight gets from point A to point B to arrive on time and in full. We feel like as an industry, we could do better at that, and how we go about helping companies ensure their freight gets to where it's supposed to go is providing real-time visibility into not just the location of their freight, but also the conditions that it's in, the temperature, the humidity, are doors open or not, how it's being handled, and so forth. We utilize IoT trackers, software, and we also have monitoring services that we layer together to help companies keep track of things.
Perfect. I appreciate each of you guys joining us today on the More Than a Broker podcast. And I think this is one of the exciting things that we get to do through this platform is to bring people from different backgrounds within the industry and really have kind of an open collaboration and discussion on some of the biggest topics that we're facing today. Again, I appreciate each of you guys joining us today. And I think as I look at the way that my path has crossed with each of you, it all comes down to a common theme, right? Theft, fraud, risk prevention, and loss prevention, et cetera, within the industry. And I think in each instance, there's been probably a more broad reason that led me to each of you guys and each of your companies. But, when I think of visibility, that brought me to Tive, looking at the data that we could leverage from a carrier base, that brought me to Joe with CarrierOK. And then looking at what happens after there's a theft suspected or there's suspected fraud, et cetera, that obviously leads into Keith with CargoNet. As we look at the different topics that we'll go into, I think one of the important things to discuss is what are you guys seeing from your ends on current trends in theft or fraud within the industry. So if you think of how you guys play an important role and what are the things that you're seeing from a theft prevention, from a fraud prevention, and knowing who you're doing business with.
I think what's interesting is, so we started just around this time last year. CarrierOK was started in January of 2023. And we came into a space where fraud was increasing hundreds of percent, like 400, 500% year over year. And I think this was largely due to the pandemic and the FMCSA lowering the barriers to entry for new MCs. It was increasingly easy to get an MC number and get an authority. And at the same time, the industry has been moving online and increasingly going to these digital load boards where they can quickly access the spot market, but where you have less and less information about who you're working with. And so I think what was interesting for us was we were coming in 2023 and simultaneously, there'd really been one carrier vetting solution in the early 2000s. And as we came on, we were seeing all sorts of solutions come up. I think in 2021, there were a handful of solutions that had come in. What's frustrating is that even though there's a handful now of really great vetting solutions, is this problem continues to increase. And I think 2024 is going to be just as bad, if not worse, as the previous years.
I had a conversation with one of Keith's colleagues yesterday, and I just made the comment of, I don't know that this issue is going away. And his response was, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I'm telling you, it was an issue then, and it's an issue today, and it's a growing issue.
I think one of the major challenges is a lot of the solutions that the industry requires end up being pretty expensive. And so creating an affordable solution for the 80% of the market, that long tail of the market that maybe can't afford really intricate cybersecurity solutions, I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to approach a solution across the industry.
I would agree with that, Joe. And it's more than just technology too. Like, people have to communicate with one another. And I think it requires trust and relying on good relationships, relying on whether that's carrier broker relationships, whether that's carrier driver relationships and shippers as well. Just proper vetting is huge, and anything to kind of bolster those relationships. I think we're in an interesting scenario, what we're seeing on our end at Tive, certainly an uptick in theft, but we're also in the midst of the combination of two interesting greater factors. One being inflation, the cost of living is going up. And at the same time, there's a lot of additional capacity in the market, and freight rates, especially the spot market, are quite low. So, the smaller carriers are kind of faced with a double whammy where they're not making as good of money as they were maybe a few years ago because rates are a bit low. And at the same time, their bills are a lot higher. So there's a lot more stress that's on the backs of a lot of these small carriers. So sure, we can talk about theft a lot, but what we're also seeing a lot of is a carrier who's taking a load, has extra space in the back of his truck, and is thinking, you know what, I need to put food on the table. I can pick up this other LTL load and make some money under the table. No one's going to know about it. I'm not going to hurt anything. No one's getting hurt. I might be a little bit late, but everyone will get over it. And I really need this money. And we're seeing a lot of that sort of activity. We're seeing a lot of, in addition to that, a little bit of carriers that may turn their reefer unit from continuous to automatic or shut it off altogether and save a little bit of fuel and might forget about it. And the cargo in the back of the trailer may be compromised, or, it gets out of a temp range. So in addition to just outright theft and all the strategic theft, straight theft, and gel games and everything that's happening that's going through the roof, we're also seeing all these other security concerns where the doors to the back of trailers are opening when they shouldn't be, way more often than they should be right now. And we're seeing quite a bit of that behavior.
When I look at how the different examples that you guys walk through and the kind of the different trends that you guys are seeing from your vantage points, I think about how really the four parties on this conversation, it's all kind of interconnected, right? We have Joe and CarrierOK. That's on the front end of things, making sure that we're dealing with the right person, leveraging that information with a shipping facility that says, this is 123 trucking that's going to come in and pick it up. The driver's name is Paul. Here's the truck number. Here's the trailer number. Here's the MC and the DOT numbers that should be on the side of the truck. Please confirm that this is what arrives. That's a critical step, I think, in today's market, is opening that communication with the shipping facilities. And then as you move into in transit and the visibility platforms with the ELD tracking, and driver applications for location sharing, et cetera, that are all really connected to the truck. There's one critical flaw in that, and that's where you don't necessarily know where that cargo is. And that in-transit visibility and alerts is where, you can leverage Tive as an example, right? You can be alerted that there's a light alert or a shock alert, or that a carrier is stopped for more than a set duration of time. A lot of these things to prevent that load consolidation that Richie talked about. After the fact, or if something should go wrong and that load never delivers, you have companies like CargoNet that leverage their relationship with law enforcement and their data that they've been able to collect over the last 10 years or so to really provide a fast response when an issue happens. So without one or the other, it becomes a greater issue, right? If we don't know where the freight actually is, it's hard to dispatch the CargoNet team to try to locate it, or it's hard to engage with local authorities. You're really playing a guessing game as to where the last location was, right? If you don't have solid confidence on who the carrier is that's arriving, and you're not clued into ownership changes or things like that, right, on the front end with some of that information you can get from CarrierOK, then you're setting yourself up for creating a environment where risk and issues can definitely flourish.
This is some information that I saw that Byers and CargoNet put out, I think about a week ago. Keith, you're probably familiar with this too. That was just kind of highlighting what's going on in the marketplace. January of 2022, there were 155 new events that were reported. And January 2023, that went up to 244, and everybody was freaking out, going, holy cow, like, look how bad it is. This is unbelievable. Well, that was January 2023. January 2024, I mean, those numbers just came out. 355 new events. I mean, like this year, Keith, you could probably speak to this more because this is data from Byers, but it seems like the data is already showing that 24 is on path to blow 23 out of the water in terms of how bad cargo theft and security concerns are going to be. Exactly.
Our throughput doubled. If you go back to 2018 numbers, we're about 1,400 events. Last year, we finished up at 2,875. And this year we're on track to hit probably, well, obviously we had a big January. We hope it doesn't continue, but with the numbers you're talking, we're going to be upwards, close to 4,000 events this year, which is just astronomical. Now it could be a couple of things. It's better reporting. People are reporting more to us. As our membership base grows, we take more thefts in. But what we're seeing now is the fraud and the fraud attempts and the way they're going about it. It's cutting edge. And everybody hears me talk all the time. I mean, we're playing checkers and they're playing chess. It's almost like they're playing chess at light speed now. I talk to customers, victims every day, and the bad actors are coming up with new and better ways to do it. And now I'm starting to see different types of emerging trends with bill of lading alteration, where the load delivers, but the bill of lading is altered and you don't know about it till the claim hits 9 months later, and some other things like that. So we've got these bad guys hooked on this now. So they're hooked on these high value commodities. Some of these game headsets can be between $500 and $2,500, and you can't wean people away from that. One of the other things that we've seen is the bad actors. A lot of the shot callers now, they're not here. They're overseas. They're in Eastern Europe. So we're battling with that too, of who do we go arrest?
You mentioned the ever evolving trends. Something that's important to call out is that exact statement. It used to be the majority of issues that you came across were just bad actor double brokering a load, and the load delivers. The original broker has probably already paid the bad actor, and then they're going to have to pay the carrier that actually delivered it and negotiate on that behalf, because it's a couple $1,000, $10,000, something in that range on freight revenue. But you look at cases now, I mean, we've seen things, we've heard of things where the carrier is going in with like a legitimate name of a motor carrier on the side of their truck. And then you call that company and they're like, yeah, this has been going on since October. There are people that just have my company name, my DOT, and my MC on the side of my truck. I only run hot shots, but you can see in the inspections that there's been tractor trailers that have been getting pulled over, and inspections have been going on my record since October. That was a new one that I think is, as this continues to be an issue, that you really have to look out.
we keep thinking that the government's going to come in and solve this problem with regulation. And I go back to the days before deregulation, and we've got to solve this ourselves, whether it be better vetting and CarrierOK. It's something we've got to figure out, because we don't want the government to come back in here, because they're not going to come back in and regulate one thing. They're going to come back in and regulate everything. And we'll be back to standard rate sets, tariffs, those type of things. So we've got to look within the four walls to come up with a solution that everybody puts their best practices together. I had a customer call me this morning that they got hit with a $250,000 load of copper. They stopped a fraudulent carrier from picking it up, and 20 minutes later, they found a decent carrier and gave it to them. And it turns out it was the same carrier that tried to get the other load. They just used another identity to get the $250,000 load of copper. A blind shipment going from the Midwest to Texas, and then it winds up in California to cross dock on a blind shipment bill later.
Couldn't agree more. And makes me think, Kreg, about what you were saying about the life cycle of a shipment. CarrierOK is a solution before, Tive is during, Verisk, CargoNet, this is after. I think increasingly it goes back to what Richie was saying around relationships. Is not only across brokerage firms and carriers do there need to be really good trusted relationships, but I think also among the data providers. Because until we have a really powerful data feedback loop, if Keith's got incredible data on these incidents, and if we could pipe that data back into that first decision when you go to vet a carrier, that gets really interesting. And similarly, if we can feed some data to Tive, or Tive can, we can all share data, we can get a much bigger and clearer picture of who's moving that load and what's their behavior during and what was the outcome.
So it's like I always say, there's no silver bullet here, but you've got three great solutions on this call here. You have to have the data and the intelligence to know where the problem is. You've got a great resource to go to for information on carriers, and then you've got telematics. The telematics is not going to prevent the theft, but after the theft event occurs, it's going to give you that breadcrumb trail to find out where it is or where it went, at least start something.
And Keith, to your point in regards to regulation, even if regulation was going to end up being better than we could ever dream of, it's not happening anytime soon. That's going to take a long time. And in the interim, this problem is going to continue to get worse. And I think for companies, any company that's moving any kind of freight that is high value and one of these targeted types of commodities, whether it's headsets, whether it's food and beverage is a big target as well, electronics are a big target, then I think that we're at the stage today where the standard table stakes bare minimum should be layering all these technologies on top of one another. It should be vetting every carrier possible to get all the bad actors out right out of the gate, tracking the freight with reliable real-time devices that can tell you not just location, but have redundancy for location, that have light events that can give you more insight into what's going on, and then have relationships with CargoNet so that if something happens or any sort of outfit, I'm just saying, like, hey, we're all really good, but if regardless of whether you're working with one of the three companies here, work with somebody like all of us, do have something in place so you have redundancies here to help prevent this. We had a situation last year. Customer had about a $500,000 load of electronics. They were doing the best they could to vet their carriers, but somebody slipped through and they got a light alert on a cross-country load. And they called us and they said, is this real? Like, we got this huge spike of light. Is this really happening? Well, we looked on the satellite view of the map and this truck is showing that it's in a field. Is your truck supposed to be stopped in a field right now? Well, and you should get off the phone with us and go call someone else and look into this. They called the authorities. They were able to get cops that got out there in a timely manner, and they found two trucks in that field and they were loading freight out of one into the other. Fortunately, we were able to recover everything there because, the authorities got there in time, but it's that sort of stuff. Your overall solution is only going to be as strong as the weakest link. So if you're not vetting people on the front end, you have a weak link there. If you don't have a device on your freight, you have a weak link there. If you don't have software and processes that can help make all that data easily digestible and actionable, that's a weak link. If you don't have teams of people that can take action around the clock, that's a weak link. If you don't have relationships with a company like CargoNet, that's a weak link. Like, you want to address all of these things, and it's the best we can do right now.
Another comment, we're playing catch up right now on what they're doing today, which tomorrow is going to be yesterday. So we're just trying to stay current with what the methods that they're using now to steal this, but we really need to have our eye on the ball 5 years from now. Because if we can come up with some solutions that mitigate this, that slow the roll of the theft, and I hate to use this vernacular, but the bad guys are hooked on the drugs now. It's a business that's now legitimate because you've got an Eastern European group that's stealing this freight. I'm not going to say, I don't know for sure, but let's say they are exporting it over there, these high value goods and these high value energy drinks. Now you've got a market for it. To somebody in Eastern Europe, this is a legitimate business. They're importing product. You can't turn that off. So if we come up with a lot of good solutions and we slow the roll, what I think is we'll go back to traditional cargo theft of the truck and the trailer at the truck stop being stolen, or even farther back, the assault on the driver to take the truck. Because we're going to have to think through this, because this is not going to slow down. Because if you've got $1 million load of electronics, it's addictive. You've got to have it. You've got to have these headsets to play these games. Your kids got to have them. So there's a market for it. So we've got to be thinking of, if we slow this roll, we're not going to shut off the theft. They're just going to move to a different avenue. So we've got to take that in mind too.
Keith, you bring a good point when you talk about like the physical stealing of the truck. I think back to, in my mind, when I was thinking of cargo theft, I go back to a movie that came out probably early 2000s with some street racing and some high stakes theft of some semi trucks and truckloads, right? And
with some bad actors.
Yeah. The elaborate scheme of jumping from a car into the truck, stealing the truck, etc., tranquilizing the driver, all that stuff, which was great in the movie. But in reality, what we're facing today is not as clear cut as that, right? We've got a lot of people that listen to this that they may not ship with us. They may not vet through CarrierOK. They may not use any visibility services through Tive, and they may not use any CargoNet services either. But I think the common theme that really in the message that needs to be communicated through this is there are strategies and solutions out there. And whether it's with any company on this call or not, you've got to be diligent about your carrier selection, where the freight's going. If it's a targeted commodity, a high value commodity, something that's easily sold, if you've had historical issues with theft, putting devices into the trailer to know where that freight is. Like in the field example that Richie gave, let's say that they didn't clue into the light alert and they didn't catch that, but they moved all the pallets in. One of those trackers was in with the freight. In a perfect world that continues to transmit, that gives a roadmap to exactly where it is. And the thing that people need to be on high alert for in this industry, as a shipper, as a broker, as a carrier even as well, are just some of these red flags to look out for. Like when I started in this industry, one of my biggest customers, we did blind shipments on a daily basis. The commodity was very low value and it was the norm. But I think if you're a carrier and you receive a internet load board or a new broker that you just set up with, somebody you've never worked before, and they're telling you that it's a blind shipment and that you need to check in as a trucking company different than who you are, that should be a red flag. Blind shipments in practice are a kind of a normal part of this, but nobody should ever be asking you to lie about the carrier that you drive for when you check in. Like that should be the front end. If we could make carriers aware that the blind shipment is strictly that shipper doesn't necessarily know where the product's going, but also be in tune to the BOLs, because I've seen BOLs that say this is not a blind shipment. Like this load must deliver to the address on here. If you deliver it anywhere else, you will be prosecuted.
And education of your clients, the shipper, the manufacturer, they've got to be in this partnership with us. They can't just say, I have customers on both sides, and I have them saying, hey, look, I hired a professional transportation company. The salesperson promised me they'll get my products from A to B without any disruptions. I'm not paying for anything extra, and I'm not doing anything extra. Here's the freight, take it or leave it. We've got to get that mindset changed. They've got skin in the game, because pretty soon, when you can't get insurance anymore with some of these nuclear settlements, when you can't get this product insured, it's going to fall back on the shippers, the manufacturers. It's like what I went through back in the 80s with the grocery companies. It got to the point the grocers got so bad with their receiving, nobody would haul grocery freight anymore. And they had to change the industry of how they did business. And it's got to be a partnership. They've got to get on board with this and take those pictures, get the driver's license information, take a video camera at the entrance gate. Is the name on the door represent who you booked the freight with? If not, then everything stops. And when you start talking,
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. And I think that those processes and everything, especially when you talk about like that relationship between the shipper and their customer and the carrier and the broker, et cetera, right? If the shipping facility is taking photos of the driver's license, the name on the side of the truck, the trailer number, the picture of the seal, et cetera, they've got that information. They should include in part of their process who is the carrier that is supposed to be picking this up, and what should we do if it's not that person that shows up. And I think another key thing, and Joe, I would look at your guys' platform for this as we talk about these thefts and fraud and fictitious pickups. What are some things on that CarrierOK is leveraging, and what are some things that you're keying on to warn people on the front end that this could potentially not be a legitimate MC?
There's two things we do really well. The first is that we aggregate and structure data from across many different sources. And think FMCSA Safer Information Authority, insurance, census, safety performance, inspection data. We validate that data, we clean it, we update it twice a day. But the second thing we do, which I think speaks to your point, is we derive intelligence from that data. So we're not just bringing all that data into a single screen, but we're also identifying what we call key risk factors. So we build these really elaborate network graphs. If you ever watch Law and Order, right, when they have the red string connecting the different bad actors, that's what we're doing in a digital way. So we are figuring out, hey, does this company share contact information with a company that we know, that we've gotten reports that, hey, this company is fraudulent, and they share an address with 7 other companies that seemingly, if you just look at their authority and insurance, they look like legitimate companies. So we'll pick that up. We also look at shared equipment. In a lot of cases, what you'll see is if you dig deep into the actual VIN number and you look at the inspection history, you'll see that a lot of these fraudulent companies are sharing VINs, likely going out and getting the same vehicle inspected under multiple DOTs so that they look legitimate to a brokerage or a 3PL. You know, there's a recent case, Keith, you probably know all about this. I think it was in Ohio, where the CEO of a company was found guilty for wire fraud and cargo theft. And what you find is if you look back, and he was affiliated with multiple different companies. And if you go back and you look back when they were first indicted in May of 2023, you can see that they shared equipment with another company that also had a history of cargo theft. And so what you see is a lot of these fraudulent actors, it's so easy to stand up a new MC. As soon as they're caught, they shut down that MC and they repeat the process again. So looking at shared equipment, looking at the network's shared information across the network, whether it be their physical address, mailing address, email, phone number, and making sure that the folks that you're doing business with don't have some sort of prior relationship with a fraudulent company.
So that was Tim Root's case with the Ohio State Police. And that's I'm very familiar with that case. Thank you. But we call that the string and the connecting the dot, call that a link analysis. And we also do that with our CargoNet intelligence of theft data. We match up MC numbers, DOT numbers, and those type of things. And one of the things that we look for is multiple carriers using the same PO box, the same address. The devil's in the details. And that's the reasons you need this data that we have. And we've got the post-event data, and CarrierOK's got the information that can help you vet those carriers on the front end. And we've changed, right? When I was working for a broker back in the 80s, my way of vetting a carrier was I called them back on the same number they called me on, and they answered the phone and said the right company name. That was the old way of vetting a carrier. Now, we did search warrants, myself and Agent Lavender, when I was with the GBI. We flew to California and did a search warrant out there and kicked the door. It looked like going to one of the major intermediaries' offices. You know, a bunch of kids in there working in shorts. They're playing volleyball. They got ice cream, just like going to a broker's office now. But on the phones, it had like what to say, like what company name to say, and what name do you use when this phone rings. This is back when they were doing a lot of ComCheck scams. So the devil's in the details here. And the data that we can all provide can help the industry. We've just got to figure out a way to get that data into the system through an API or whatever. We're working on one. Our company is working on an API to get that in the system so folks can bounce that off our system before they tender that load.
Keith, that's awesome. We just set up an API as well. Would love to share information and see if we can come together to create an even better solution for the industry.
Absolutely. This is a team sport. And obviously, we all have to make money at the end of the day. But, a career lawman like me, I've got to put people in jail. And that's my number one goal.
And I think that one of the things that you talk about in sharing this data, and Keith with that post event, and Joe with one of the things I noticed that you guys are keying in on now is contact information changes and tracking that. And one of the things that I'll look for is like, who was the previous contact with this carrier? Did they recently change their email, their phone number, et cetera? Because if somebody decides that the cost of the equipment is too much, the freight rates are too low, and they're about to close down their company, and they get a phone call and somebody offers them $7,000 to buy their authority, unfortunately, there's a lot of cases where people are jumping at that. And that's why I think that historical data and keying in on those changes is important, because then you can speak to that prior owner and, they'll say, oh, no, you need to call this person. And say, well, like, I understand I need to call that person, but I want to ask you, like, what were the terms or what happened with your company? And in a lot of cases where the fraud is prevalent, they've sold their company. I sold my MC and my authority, and I gave them access to my email. And then I recently decided to just shut my email down because I was seeing a bunch of stuff that was happening. And that's why I thought maybe if I shut my email down, they wouldn't be able to do it anymore. So there's a lot of this data being leveraged together is key. What are some real world examples where you guys have prevented or caught in transit or recovered stolen goods or uncovered fraud?
One of our enterprise customers is a large fuel card and financial services provider. And they, up until using CarrierOK, they had used credit history data to verify the carriers that they were onboarding. But they were still seeing unacceptable amounts of default and increasingly fraud. And they started using the CarrierOK profile data through our API for a network of roughly 15,000 carriers. And what they saw was, over a 3-month period, they saw a 3.5 times improvement in their ability to predict not only default, but also fraud. This speaks to Richie's point earlier around stitching it all together, which is credit data alone cannot give you the full picture, and the carrier identity data alone cannot give you the full picture. But when you're able to stitch these data sources together, you can get a much better ability to predict, anticipate, and ultimately stop fraud before it happens.
We work with another large electronics company, and they had we track a lot of their freight, and they had a truckload that didn't arrive. It's supposed to arrive, it didn't arrive. So they went into our system. They said, where is it? We haven't had a light alert, but we just want to see where it is. It was supposed to go cross country. I was leaving out of Southern California. Well, it never left Southern California. Just stayed in Southern California the whole time. So they're like, why is this still in Southern California? They got skeptical. Of course, this is when they choose to go look at the driver's license of this particular driver and then find out that it's a fake license. And then shortly thereafter, again, they had all the information from us. They went to CargoNet and said, can you go pick this load up? We can tell you where it is. We have reason to believe that it's been stolen. They never opened the trailer. They just were sitting on it. For whatever reason, this happened last week. It all got recovered. CargoNet recovered it. So it's kind of a 2-part story there. The other story was from last year to share. There was something happening last year. I don't know whether people were hacking into TMS systems or how people were getting driver information. There was something where people were calling drivers and rerouting them to Houston. That was a commonality. It hit like 7 or 8 different companies that I'm aware of where their freight, their drivers were going along their merry way. They get a phone call from someone pretending to be the shipper who says, hey, there's been a change in plans. Yeah, I can give you all the information about the shipment. So you know that I'm legit, but this needs to go to Houston. Driver drops it off in Houston, it disappears. That hit a lot of people. What we started doing is our customers needed devices for those lanes. Our software allows for geofencing. So we can draw out red zones and risk zones and geofence specific areas and set up alerts around if a truck stops in that area, whenever it enters a certain geofenced area, when it exits that area. So we geofenced the whole state of Texas for several of our customers, knowing that their freight had no business being anywhere in Texas, let alone Houston. And this way, if anything happened, right, they're going to do everything they can to filter bad actors on the front end. But now we have something in place to where if something happens and a truck crosses the border into Texas, they were going to get text messages and emails. And that helped out a lot of people as well.
The interesting thing that you talked about on the driver getting a phone call and saying, hey, you need to take it here, et cetera, right? again, the mission with this platform and this podcast is to educate everybody involved, right? And if there's carriers that are listening to us, drivers that are listening to us, if you get a phone call and you book a load and they offer to pay you via Zelle, or they offer something that just doesn't seem right? Like the BOL says this, they're telling me to check in as something else, but it doesn't say that on the side of my truck, et cetera. Just like as a community, we need everybody to be on high alert of this issue because, ultimately there's a lot of monetary value in some of these shipments. And when they go missing, there's a lot of people that are impacted by it. One other thing I think that we should call out and that we should make people aware of is we all go through email, phishing, scam training, I'm sure, right? It has been a big problem with some of the internet load boards with some of these bad actors. They're posing as a carrier. They're not actually with that carrier. Like you could key on that from the contact info, et cetera, that you're getting from the CarrierOK side, but they're essentially saying, I'd love to set this shipment up with you, but I can't. This review about you, your company that mentions you by name makes me worry. And then so somebody's like, oh, it mentions me by name. They don't even think about it. They open up the link. They put in their credentials for that internet load board. And now that person has 24 hours or, even as little as an hour or two before somebody catches on that there's like an uptick in people calling about loads that they don't have, et cetera. And in that time frame, there are multiple loads that are at risk. So people think that they're getting it from a legitimate person. I would tell you, if an email looks weird, if you're a driver, if you're a carrier, going to book a load and you're grabbing it off of a load board and the contact info looks weird and they don't have the standard processes that you're used to with the majority of large brokers today, like I would key into that and just be aware. If you're a carrier that you think something's up, reach out to the main number for that company and say, hey, does this person work for you? It could be as simple as that, and you could avoid being involved in this. And I spoke with the lady, and unfortunately, she's like, her thought was, I thought this was just going to get consolidated or put on the rail or something. Like I had no idea that they were going to steal it. I'm like, well, it's still bad that you were okay with that front piece of it, but everybody's got to do their part here.
I think one thing to be mindful of, Kreg, is that if people haven't used something like CarrierOK or Tive or some of these technologies, buckle up, because there's kind of your awareness kind of falls into four buckets. There's the known knowns. There's everything that you know that you know. There's the known unknowns. I know that I don't know these things. I'd like to know these things, but I'm aware that I don't know these things. There's the unknown knowns, all the stuff you forgot, right? It's not at the front of your mind. You're like, oh yeah, I did know that. Yeah, I remember that. But then there's this other box of the unknown unknowns. Everything that you don't know that you don't know. And when you deploy something like CarrierOK, you might find out that a decent portion of your quote unquote carrier network might have some problems. Or you might find out when you deploy Tive that people are opening doors way more often than you're comfortable with. You might see one or two cockroaches in your kitchen, but that might be a sign that you got like 50,000 of them behind your cabinets. But you still got to rip that Band-Aid. If you don't address these issues, if you don't dig into it and really do the work and deploy technologies, then the risk overall in the marketplace is rising quickly, and it's going to catch up with you if you don't do something.
One of the things I wanted to talk about quickly before we wrap up, I think it's an important topic, and I wanted to get your take on it, Joe, is what do the safety scores tell us? What story does the basics and the safety scores and those thresholds tell us about the risk potential with a motor carrier?
What I think about is attention to detail, and how if you see something small that's wrong, it's usually the sign of a bigger issue. And so when you open up the safety history on a company, if you see that they're not logging information correctly, if they have a high out of service percentage, certainly if they have any sort of alcohol related incident or drug related incident, if there's a single broken window, the rest of the house is probably not doing so well. So I think safety performance is really a leading indicator generally of when a company is maybe headed into a tough position where they might, Richie mentioned it earlier on the call, where they might start engaging in maybe some desperate behavior, or it's an indication of a company that's simply just not being run above board. And so, in some cases, everyone, especially these large companies with lots of power units, lots of drivers, they're going to run into some safety violations here and there. but it's really important to see what's the pattern of behavior and how might that inform the risk of working with that carrier.
Valid points. I think there was a story that Andrew Elsner mentions. He takes this approach, I think, with our office spaces too, right? There was I believe it may have been New York. There was some high crime areas and a lot of the windows were broken out. The city went back in and started repairing the buildings, fixing the appearance and everything like that. And the behavior of the people in those communities started to fall in line. And I think it's the same concept here. Is the reason that all this data is logged is because it tells a story, and it tells us our risk factors on the front end for bad actors or for risk from an accident standpoint. And then you leverage the data in transit. If it's a team run and you're getting location pings on it and they've stopped for 4 or 5 hours, there's probably something going on. It's having access to the data. It's being in tune to the data. And I think it's spreading awareness throughout the logistics community so we can all kind of do our part to help combat this problem that's plaguing the industry with theft and fraud and load consolidation, et cetera. So I appreciate your time, Joe and Richie and Keith, for everything that you guys contributed today and what you guys are doing on a daily basis to make the industry more aware and more diligent and to help prevent these issues and help alert of issues as they're happening in real time and to help recover from issues if they do end up happening. So again, I'm just thankful that each of you guys took some time here to speak with us and help us on the More Than a Broker podcast to help just continue to push these topics out and make everybody in our community aware.
Well, Kreg, thanks to you and the Spot team for giving us a platform. I think more conversations like this are really necessary, like you said, to educate the industry and get the word out so we can all work together to combat this issue.
Yeah, Joe, you took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, Kreg, thanks for this. I mean, it's so important to open up the lines of communication, spread the awareness, make sure people know what's going on, and happy to be part of the conversation. And hopefully we can all work together to make a dent in this and make things a little bit better.
And that's a wrap for More Than a Broker. You heard firsthand accounts from industry experts and Spot's hardworking individuals, revealing a culture of collaboration and innovation. For more information about Spot, our service offerings, our people and culture, our job postings and more, check us out online at spotinc.com. That is spotinc.com. Thank you for listening and for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep striving to be more than a broker.